Welcome everybody. It is Business Monday and we've got a banner day here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Also want to thank our friends at Deepwater Wind for all their support. There is a ton of news today. We busted into Care New England's financials and found that Care New England, even post closing down Memorial Hospital, is not in the greatest financial situation that one would hope. Governor, just a little while ago, had a press conference. Kate Nagel, our news editor, was over there covering that on the issue of gun control. Early this morning, our friend here, the money man up at Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center World at Bryant University, released a poll on public education perceptions. And we'll dig into that in 1 second. And also the POSOC supporters, the public unions, the building trade unions, released a separate poll trying to revive some life into that. That didn't, I don't think, went as well as they had hoped. Let's jump into it. Cha-ching. Gary Sass, how are you today?
Good, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Great.
You guys released a poll bright and early this morning, overnight. And it dug into the issues related to the governor's proposal of her $1 billion to improve schools, specifically $250 million bond issue. What was the outcome on that?
Well, nothing surprising. 65% of the people, almost 2/3, said they favor the bond issue. And that's pretty typical. Most bond issues in the state pass with over 60% of the vote. So
this is a big number, though. This is the biggest. I think it's the biggest number.
Yeah, but let me think about this for a second. So
sure.
I'm almost just sit and speculate. That's $250 million to be spent over 5 years.
Yeah.
What if you passed a $150 million bond issue to be spent over 3 years?
Right.
You could fix up twice as many schools and not go as deep in debt. And then in the third year, you can request additional debt if the program is working out. So I think the legislature has to look at it closely, look at the structure, not the intent. We obviously need to put more money into school facilities. The other issue is, how is the money going to be divided up? I've spoken to some local officials who are concerned about that. I don't know if they've voiced their concerns to anybody or voiced them publicly, but they want to make sure they get a piece of the action. And they're concerned that a few cities that have tremendous infrastructure problems might get most of the money. So, you know, there are issues.
The Providences, the Pawtuckets.
Right, and they may need it, but we need a good conversation of how the money is going to be distributed. And we need a good conversation of, can we bond less and do more in a shorter period of time? But there's no question that a bond issue to improve school facilities, school construction, school repair is very popular, and it'll pass.
Some other things that poll unveiled was kind of some interesting insights into perceptions about how Rhode Islanders felt about the quality of education. One was, does public schools in Rhode Island get kids college ready? And then the other component of I think it was the next question, does it get it ready for the workforce? Walk us through both those.
Well, good paying jobs, but let me take a step back, because
sure.
That's one of the issues in the poll that we have to understand better and reconcile. We first asked the question before that, you know, how would you grade schools?
Yeah.
And, you know, the grading, about 1/3 of the people would give the school system an A or a B, about 35% a C. So, you know, overall, there was about, you know, 2/3 of the people gave the school system a C or better. Only 20% failed it. When you ask the same question of people who had children in schools, 60% of them gave an A or a B as opposed to 33%. So when you read that, you come to the conclusion that the public is not absolutely satisfied,
right,
but reasonably happy with the schools. They think the schools are doing a creditable job. They give them a passing grade. Like to see more A's and B's, but they still give them a passing grade. Having said that, then the question you were raising comes up, okay, if you give the school a passing grade, then how well do you think the school is doing in preparing your kids to be either successful in college or to get a good paying job? And the numbers change. On the question I think was most important, you know, how well a job the schools are doing for your kid to succeed in college, it was almost split right down the middle.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just barely over 50%.
53% thought schools were preparing kids, you know, well to succeed in college. And that's not an overwhelming endorsement. So
That is not. And let me tell you a funny thing. We haven't done it in the last few years, but we did it 3 or 4 times. We went to each of the public and private schools in Rhode Island and asked them where their top 3 students in ranked were going to college. It was very interesting, and clearly in some of the schools, some of the colleges were buying talent with full 4-year scholarships. Providence College would go out and grab, the #1 kid at Mount. The kid might also get into Brown, but he was going to Providence College. You saw clusters, private schools, pretty good, Ivy Leagues, etc. Then the next tier were the top suburban schools, going to very interesting places. Narragansett, their kids always went. The top 3 always went someplace. But when you fell into those urban, sometimes on the urban schools it would be URI, #1, CCRI, and not going to college for the 3rd-ranked kid in that class.
And some of it was driven by a couple of things. Some of it was driven by finances.
Yeah, absolutely.
The poor kids, couldn't afford to go to college. Some of it was driven by family expectations. And so, 100 years ago when immigrants came, they may have aspired for their kids to go to Brown or Harvard,
Right.
but the realistic choice was something else, because that's what they were comfortable with, that's what they knew, that's what they could afford. So you see some of that in the urban areas.
Yeah.
And the important question, there are 2 important questions. The first is the kids in urban areas that aspire to go to, less so URI, but CCRI and RIC, what do they get when they get there?
Right.
That's the critical question, because we do know what you said is a fact, that our poor kids have no choice. Our kids that have immigrant families, that's the expectation.
And are they college ready when they get there?
Well, we know that there's over half the people that go to CCRI require remedial education.
Right.
So that answers that
They're
question.
not getting 2 years and then on to URI and transferring with their credits from CCRI. They're doing 3 and sometimes longer to be able to get that 2-year associate's done.
And maybe we don't educate parents well enough on what to expect, because the figures I mentioned before, where 60% of the people give schools A, B, or C, passing, grade. What are their expectations from the schools? Because if so many kids go into college, go to the community college, have to take remedial courses, there's an inconsistency between 60% of the people saying the schools are passing, because that's not a
Right.
passing school.
So what was the biggest surprise in the poll for you?
We discussed it. The biggest surprise to me in the poll, was the relatively split numbers between the expectations that kids would do well in college or do well in getting a good paying job. I wasn't surprised at all by the passing grades given schools.
Yeah.
I was a little bit surprised. There's a big difference, and we didn't get here into the crosstabs, but the people that had children in the schools graded the schools much higher than the general population did.
Did any insights on that? And was there any indicators as why that came out? Is that more loyalty or a higher, or just misunderstandings of what the expectations
I don't know
are?
the answer to the question, and some of the crosstabs we looked at, the sampling wasn't big enough to reach a generalization. So, we had a clue that people made incomes less than 25,000, had a lower esteem for the schools, but the sampling wasn't big enough to make a judgment on that. The margins of error were much too great for some of the subgroups.
Any big regional differences around the state?
We didn't look at geography.
And did you see anything about, were they more satisfied with the younger kids in school versus older kids?
Didn't make that distinction. But we did find out this. We asked the question, what were the greatest problems?
Yeah.
And the 3 greatest problems, 40% said facilities, which supports, again, what we
Right.
talked about with bond issues. But another 30%, this is the second biggest problem, was parent-teacher communications.
Mm-hmm.
So a third of the people in the state, said that a great problem, significant problem, was the ability of parents and teachers to communicate. And then the third issue was the adequacy of state aid, the adequacy of state support, which you would expect. So the surprise to me was that it was a very high percentage, close to facilities, on people feeling that communications between parents and schools needed to be made better.
If you're prognosticating, you've got to feel coming out of this, and this is the first time that this has been polled, that the governor's proposal is in pretty good shape, depending on, you know, no other.
I always thought it was in good shape because you just have to look back on history of bond issues in the state. And it's very rare that a bond issue gets below 60%. There's some, you know, prison might not get 60%, but schools, education, environmental projects, roads, generally score pretty high in public approval. I think the issue that is never discussed is what is a fiscally responsible amount. And the general treasurer in a report, looking at the state debt, said, you know, a fiscally responsible bond package would be about 222, 225 million. And as we've discussed before, when you take into account the money for higher education, the money for environmental and other bond issues, it's closer to 370,000. So I think we have to look at the affordability issue. And I think the point that I made before is how quickly can we get the money in the ground. It might make sense to have a bond issue for 150 million and spend 50 million each year for the next 3 years, and 25 million over 5 years. There's a huge difference. And then the equitable distribution, and whatever that means, that they can have to sort their way through that one.
Will shovel ready? Remember that term, shovel ready?
Well,
will shovel ready projects get money first?
Well, these are roof ready and and air conditioning ready and structural.
Is there a mistake being made? General Treasurer Magaziner sent out a press release today calling this a once-in-a-generation initiative. There's according to the kind of blue ribbon study that was released in September, there's about $3.2 billion worth of infrastructure need. And I've got to say, I thought it was actually fairly conservative. It was saying, hey, listen, you could fix classical high school for 40, 30, or $40 million, or you could replace it for 70 or $80 million. I think most people, and if you're talking about your blue ribbon school in your state capital, you would want to replace that school. It's a tired facility, it's outdated. Well, let's just go with the 3.2 number. We're really only talking about over a fairly long period of time putting a fraction of the resources into this. And then aren't we going to exhaust the taxpayer and misrepresent to the taxpayer what the real need is and not satisfy the problem?
I think the governor did misrepresent. She spoke about $1 billion program, and it's really closer to $250 or $300 million program, depending how you count it.
Yeah.
Some of the other money was given to communities already, and some of that probably is reimbursing them for projects they've undertaken. There's no saying that you eat the elephant one bite at a time. And when you look at what our debt capacity is, you know, what we're retiring, what we're going to, you know, borrow, it's not an unreasonable number. 250 is not unreasonable. I think what is questionable is how quickly you spend the money. If you tell me we have a $25 million program a year to make sure the schools are safe, kids breathe, have a good environment, you know, breathe, you know, clean air, warm, not wet, then there's a question of we could manage to do more if the projects are available and not go any further in debt.
So let me ask you a question. Saul Kaplan and I from Business Innovation Factory last Monday spent a fair amount of time talking about this. Is this really the wrong program? Is it just fix the roof and fix the windows, dry and warm and blah, 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 when we really need a real, you know, in most cases, we're in the upper echelons of per pupil spending in the United States of America. We're in the mid-level to bottom level of the outcomes of the quality of the education we produce by all measures, regardless of who's conducting the study, whether it's the Chronicle of Education or across the board. So shouldn't we really take this opportunity? You know, we talk about it all the time. We don't really do the big plan and create the big strategy. Should we really, instead of just fix the roof, maybe really think about what kind of schools do we want?
Well, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. If you put a
well, we're not good at walking, and we're really not good at chewing gum right at the moment. So that's a big push. You're asking us to do two things. We can't do either one of them right now.
Then you have a real leadership problem, because the issue you have is you have real live kids in very bad school facilities. So there's no reason why you can't invest in heating and air conditioning and roofs and environmental, soundness. At the same time, you put together a big plan. And I would argue that the way the plan is constructed, you have an opportunity to do that. Because we always make the mistake, we're gonna develop a big plan, it's not implemented for 10 years, and the poor unfortunates that have to live in the system for the next 10 years don't live in a very good system.
Well, juxtapose it though. Moses Brown, I think, just built a fine arts building for 10 or 15 million dollars. They just built a dedicated squash center for $5 million. I mean, that's I'm not so sure that over at Roger Williams Middle School here in Providence, there's a fine arts center. There might be a box of crayon 64s back from the 50s in a closet somewhere in the teacher's resources, and I'm pretty positive that there is no squash courts over there at Roger Williams Middle School.
I would hope there's good laboratory equipment so the kids can learn chemistry and physics.
Yeah, you're thinking that that's going on over at Roger Williams Middle School?
But see, the point is, there's a balance. How do you invest so the kids there today in the next 4 years are not cheated and become just another lost generation? At the same time, put together a longer range plan. And so I would argue that, just kind of arbitrarily, that the amount of money that the governor's recommended, the $250 or less than that, doesn't preclude you from putting together the big bang and the bigger investment. And we know from a bond issue perspective, it's not a political issue. The bond issue will be approved for the interim fixes as well as the long-term fixes. So, and it's the same with the jobs thing. We talk about high-tech jobs, and we got a bunch of blue-collar people or people with the semi-skilled who we ignore. And you see what's happening to the economy of the state as we ignore them. So you have to deal with the hand that you dealt, but because you deal with the hand that you dealt doesn't mean you can fix the game at some point.
Whether you like roadworks or don't like roadworks, the toll revenue creates a dedicated source of funding for some level of infrastructure improvement. Should we be looking for, whether it's this new sports gambling that everybody anticipates, instead of pulling it right back into the general fund, should we be looking at some form of dedicated funding to be able to fund ongoing improvements to our infrastructure?
Let me tell you a story about that, because money's fungible. And so when the lottery was sold, the lottery is going to be used for education. Okay, well, now people argue the lottery is not being used for education. I argue that it is, because the lottery will generate $300-400 million, and we're spending over $1 billion on education.
Right.
So the money's fungible. When you talk about earmarking, you got to be very careful of what you're doing, because we can end up earmarking money and freeze out other money.
Spoken like a former director of administration.
just fiscally sound, flexibility. There's a difference between doing that and earmarking gasoline tax money for roads.
But should we? I mean, should we just have that so we don't get $3.2 billion in the hole?
Well, you can, but it has to come from somewhere, and this is the problem is nobody wants to make the choices. We can argue that we got to put 1 cent of the sales tax. You pick any revenue source you want. Pick lottery, pick the sales tax. And last time I looked, 1% of the sales tax probably generates $125-130 million. So if you took the 1% of the sales tax, and that we're going to have $130 million every year to fix up our schools or do the big plan, then no one in that state house wants to make $130 million in cuts in other programs.
But we did it when we wanted to do the get rid of the auto excise tax. We figured out a way. Well, it was an issue of priorities.
But it's the size of the priorities. The automobile excise tax was about $20 million a year, so second year is 40, 60. I think there's a much better use of getting rid of things. If you want to talk about economic development, we should get rid of the property tax on tangible property. Do that over 10 years. That'll cost about $180 million over 10 years, and that'll have a bigger economic impact and do more to grow the property tax base to support education. Anything else I think we could do.
With that, we've got the money man, Gary Sass, unleashing the new poll up there at the Hassenfeld Institute of Bryant University. As always, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
The biggest insights going on the issue of the state's fiscal matters. We're going to be right back at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Thanks very much. Welcome back, everybody, to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton. It is Business Monday. Thanks to Gary Sass, the money man, coming in and talking about the new poll released today by Bryant University's Hassenfeld Institute, focused in on education and how people perceive, one, the governor's proposal to put $250 million bond issue out in front of the voters this November, which did get a green light according to this poll. Also, other perceptions about the quality of education, what their expectations are. Also want to thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind for all their support. I want to introduce Megan Decker.
Hi.
Ad Guru. She's been on before, but this is a little more formal program that we're going to be doing once a month together.
Excited to be a part of it. So thanks for having me.
So Megan, if you saw her before, know that Rhode Island native, but went off to New York and worked in big ad agencies, and also in Connecticut, worked on big accounts, and now is back as the CEO, President and Chief Operating Officer.
Yep, President and COO. We have to let Dave have his spot as CEO, but we do work in partnership.
Right,
so.
in G Media. And a little bit different type of ad agency, a little different approach, very hands-on.
For sure.
And a lot of event-driven, experiential type of marketing as part of the mix of what you do for clients.
Yeah, I think it's been, a nice, interesting transition. So, to my New York background, which is where I spent most of my career till coming on board here, a lot of branding and activation. And with G Media, we have some real great anchor clients that we have, a huge piece of engagement marketing that we do with them, which is so important to, really, touch the consumers that you're working with. But we're doing we have a lot of fun efforts and practices going on. We have a local and national media buying arm that we have through Icon, which is great. And we're doing some really interesting, fun stuff. So I think it's going to be a very interesting 2018, not just for us, but for everybody, from the client side to advertisers and agencies.
So I think everybody in the world of advertising, I don't know, we have 50 or 60 advertisers at GoLocal, are all looking for, this is a much more complicated experience for people who are running companies. It used to be in the good old days, you bought some TV and you bought some print, and you dropped some direct mail, and you're kind of done.
Yeah, maybe
you went to a trade show for the B2B.
Yeah, you invested your media.
Yeah.
And you figured 50% will work, and once it was done, you didn't know what 50% worked, but you were happy.
Right, that's right. And now the average business gets about 40 calls a week with solicitations from everybody from Groupons to social media firms, and they're all trying to figure it out. And obviously, this device, the little mobile device that everybody picks up on average 140 times plus per day, is just a mammoth X factor as to where people are spending their time and energy. Sure. Talk a little bit about, you work with big brands, national brands, and you work with small Rhode Island companies that are looking to be the next big brand. Talk about strategies and how you look at and try and get messages to phones, ultimately.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's huge is whatever side of the space you're on, whether you're the advertiser, the client, we have to remember, crap, it's 2018, right?
Yeah,
We're getting old, and now Generation Z is coming into the workplace.
Right.
Like, they now have the buying power, they're making the decisions, so we have to shift with them, but we also have to be cognizant of our other groups, right? So it's really, I don't think there's no one fit solution. If there was, or there was a person that knew of it, I would be hiring them right now.
Yeah,
if you know who they are, let me know.
Yeah.
But it's a mix, right? So we need to be engaging with our consumers live, touch points through engagement marketing, activations, but there's also the media component, and it's that balance of, okay, how am I interacting with them in the digital space? So in being cognizant of this new generation that we have to keep in mind, I mean, we're looking at a generation where they are looking at Snapchat and Instagram for at least an hour a day.
Right.
81% of them. And then you have your millennials who are in that space too, but it's just pushing more and more video content. Yeah. So all of the things that I think are key important is nobody wants to look at a website anymore. They want content, they want to see video, And they want to hear from not just the brand, but influencers.
Yeah.
Especially with, the generations that we're now looking at that are going to be making these decisions. So big on digital, big on video content, and figuring out this programmatic animal.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your thoughts on that one?
So programmatic is this way that you buy digital ads, sort of almost in a bidding structure. We don't subscribe to it. We don't take any programmatic ads. We don't take any ad networks. In my previous life in ad business, I don't know. I always liked high quality custom. I always wanted to be exactly what GoLocal does around content that's relevant. If you're talking to people and trying to sell them jewelry, put it in a component and in a structure that's like that. So the more contextual, I think the better. I also think that there's be careful what you wish for. You may win the battle but lose the war, which is I think some media companies are getting crushed because of programmatic.
They are.
And you're not going to have any high quality media left to be able to be contextual in a lot of places. I mean, we don't need to talk about newspapers or radio to talk about that. I think there's what I find most exciting right now in what we do for some of the advertisers we have is because of social media, you can create whole structures and then push it at exactly who you want to talk to. I mean, you can talk to left-handed people in Cranston, Rhode Island, who went to Cranston East but not Cranston West. It may cost a little bit, but it's 100 times cheaper than trying to figure it out and build a direct mail strategy for those folks.
No, absolutely. And I think, for me, I think the programmatic scenario is something that everyone's trying to crack the nut, right? From your larger agencies to your small local. And I think there's some great opportunities in that space. First is, I think, 2010 on, everyone thought programmatic was going to be the strategy.
Yeah, right.
We don't need an agency. We can start bringing them in-house. And some clients and companies are bringing it in-house, and it's working.
Yeah.
And for some, it's not. What I think is some great opportunity where I'm excited to be back in Rhode Island is there's a huge space in this area for the local companies. Right? So you're building your profiles and your segmentations from these large agencies and companies. Who's touching that secondary audience?
Yeah.
And
that middle market company, that successful, maybe they're doing $10 million in sales or $100 million in sales. And big agencies in Boston don't really want to touch them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the mid-size agencies don't exist anymore. Those agencies with 30 to 50 people, there used to be 100 of agencies that size in New England, and now they're gone. Can people live by digital alone?
I think some would like to.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a safe place to play. I think sure you can, and I think there's a lot of companies, some big companies that we can call out.
Right, we don't see a lot of Amazon billboards.
No, you can, but I think the tides will shift, and you'll get hurt by it. It's kind of the same way that I look at programmatic and bringing it in house and getting rid of your agency. There's going to be a point where you realize, okay, do we have the right strategy behind this? There is something to be said for a person versus just that trading desk.
So let's talk about the last issue, and then we'll let you go back to growing this agency and living the dream. Facebook has made a tremendous number of algorithm changes over the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and it's shaken up a lot of people. And about 80% of Rhode Islanders go onto Facebook on a regular basis. They're seeing a very different experience in their news feed. What's that doing to folks besides freaking out a lot of companies that were making a lot of sales on Facebook?
Well, I think it's something obviously duly should be freaked out a little bit.
Yeah.
They're losing organic growth opportunities.
Right.
But again, I think you get your minute to freak out or your 2 days, and then it's kind of back to what I said from the get-go is we have to shift. We have to constantly be thinking ahead and moving forward in everything we're doing, and that also means shifting with the industry and who we're marketing to. And that is a segment that wants to hear from influencers, not from the brand directly.
So isn't that, though, just a failure of a realization? There's a little bit of our take, is that, listen, it's Facebook's sandbox. I mean, they built it, they own it, they can change the rules whenever they want. They're wildly successful, arguably the most successful media company maybe ever. And don't folks need to anticipate that they're going to constantly see changes when Facebook wants to do something different and create a new relationship?
Yeah, I think you have to be prepared for that. You know, Zuckerberg said this is what we're gonna do, and we're gonna take the hit on it. But I think we'll also see that shift happen. That people will just shift with those times and work through influence marketing more, and not, you know, trying to push so much. You're now gonna see more pictures of my twins than you will see.
I'm gonna see more pictures of your twins. And what's the hashtag you always put?
The twins are winning.
The twins are
You'll
winning.
just see more content from Megan Decker than you will of any advertisements. You should be excited about this.
I have seen the pictures of your twins in my Facebook feed, and you'll see more of Bear, our chocolate lab, who is a regular favorite within the Rhode Island Facebook ecosystem.
They're going to be our new marketing tools.
I want to thank you so much.
You.
You're going to be on every month.
Yes, I'm excited for it.
We're really excited about it. And folks out there, if you've got a question, feel free to email it into news@GoLocalProv, and we'll work it in and see if we can get you an answer on it, and have some discussion on it, or put it up on Facebook, on the Facebook Live posting as well. Megan Decker, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back in just 1 second with Saul Kaplan from Business Innovation Factory. Welcome back, everybody. Saul Kaplan, Mr. Innovation, is here for the last segment on Business Monday. Thank Gary Sass and Megan Decker for their insights and contributions. Let's see. You've got a new podcast.
I just released a new podcast. We've been doing this now for a few years. It's just another form of storytelling.
Yep.
So I enjoy learning a new trick.
Yep.
And so I've been interviewing. You know how big our community is and how many crazy cool innovators we have in it over all the years.
You got a lot of
Summit on, right? So a lot of people who are glad to come in and do a half-hour discussion with me. It's called the Business Model Sandbox Podcast. You can see it on our website. The one we just released this month is really worth listening to. It's the president of WGU, Western Governors University. This is pretty amazing.
I listened to it. I did.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah, it's pretty
Like,
good.
Not me,
No.
him.
He's got, what, 90,000 students?
Scott Pulsifer. So this is, how we talk about innovating higher ed and colleges and universities, and we're struggling with how do we use technology and online versus in the classroom, and depending on how progressive you are as a leader at a university, you may resist it completely, or maybe you're just getting started to figure it out. These guys, WGU, 20 years old. They were the pioneer in all online. They have no bricks and mortar, right? And they today have 90,000 students enrolled, and they don't just focus on checking the boxes to get a degree, right? They focus on whether the degree is relevant and people can get a job and be successful in the workforce. Their statistics and outcomes are absolutely amazing. It's just an incredible story for anyone trying to transform, whatever it is, but certainly if you're in the education business and the higher ed space, you gotta hear the WGU story. You gotta listen to Scott Pulsifer. The other thing last thing I'll just share about that's really interesting is this is a university that, we often talk about political will and the role the politicians play in this.
Sure.
This thing was founded by 5 Western governors.
Yeah, right.
That started this thing, who said to their home state universities, guys keep growing, you keep building, but you can't get there fast enough to meet the needs of our citizens. The internet had just become viable,
Right.
as a mechanism for online learning. And the governors had the political will to not only set it up, but no one of the 5 governors controlled it. Right? They actually set up the governance structure that gave them the freedom to innovate and get stronger. And now you wake up 20 years later, and you have 90,000 students. They put over 125,000 people through it.
Who has the T-shirt contract on that one?
Oh my goodness. Anyway, thanks for asking. The podcast is a lot of fun. I love having these conversations, as you can tell. And we've been doing it now for 2 years, so you can literally go back. It's on iTunes, so you can listen to it during drive time or whatever. And I've interviewed over the 2 years some pretty interesting folks in that.
Last week we talked about education. Gary was just on talking about polling. It looks like the vast majority of Rhode Islanders are in favor of it. I bounced off our discussion last
See, I
week.
told you.
Stuck it to Gary a little bit and say, should we be looking
Sure
at a
you
little
did.
more than warmer and cooler or whatever
I'm sure.
whatever new roof and new windows? Healthcare's really in the news in Rhode Island right
Goodness,
now.
yes, it
And
is.
we had a piece today about Care New England, who has shut down a major hospital in the
Right.
state, and 600-800 full-time employees or I guess employees are out, and about 600 of them were FTEs. It looks like we're just at the beginning of a real restructuring of healthcare in Rhode Island, and we're in a battle between titans like Brown University against mega titan Partners Healthcare in Boston. How do you see this, and where do you see next in this battle?
Yeah, well, just like we've talked about transforming the education system, healthcare is right there. We need to think about transformational solutions. The idea that we're just going to play at the margins and incrementally improve the healthcare system. This is a healthcare system that was built to treat us when we got sick. Right? This was a healthcare system.
And it was built
right.
100, functionally.
A long time ago.
Yeah, a long
But what's
time
changed
ago.
is this idea that we have to focus everything on what happens when we get sick, and it never really stepped up to the challenge of how about we actually do the things that keep us from getting sick in the first place. Right? And until we become more about wellness and well-being, and figure out how to build a model around that, and then say when we get sick, we should have the best technology and access. And hospitals, which are the highest cost place to get access to health care, are so central to our U.S. healthcare system, right, that now all of a sudden the struggle is how do we find platforms that deliver better access, better healthcare outcomes, that don't have all of the bricks and mortar, don't have all of the cost of all the specialists that are in the hospitals, and a lot of stuff is moving out of hospitals. Not just Rhode Island. If you look across the country, right, over the course of the last 20 years, we've gone from, I'm going to give you approximate numbers, I think we had maybe 6,500 hospitals in the U.S. That number is now closer to 5,000, a little over 5,000. It has been steadily changing, but most of that has been out in the more rural areas
Where
that
small
didn't have the
community-
critical mass.
Right.
Now you're starting to see hospitals like our own, hospital system.
But we don't seem
try
to have any
rationalize.
game plan. We're just reacting to whatever the chaos is. The anecdotal stories that are going on now is because of the closure of Memorial, the waiting time in the emergency room at Miriam Hospital, which is the closest hospital to, is now 3.5, 4 hours before you even touch a human being.
They have beds in the hallways.
They have beds in the hallway, and Miriam was a kind of place where, you got in and out and in a relatively short period of time. There seems to be no strategizing. It's just one crisis. The pension fund over at St. Joe's collapsed. Memorial's not viable. Landmark always seems a week away from
But my
something
question about
catastrophic.
My question about that is, how many of the people that are going to a hospital-based emergency room
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a very significant percentage of them that belong there because they might need to be hospitalized.
Right.
But how many of them are there as opposed to going to a primary care doctor or a less expensive clinic, right, where they could get triaged and they could get cared for? Instead, we wait until we get really sick.
Right.
We don't take care of it, and then we're so sick that we've got to go into the ER and we've got to be on a bed in the hallway waiting for the cause. We've got to we have to transform that. We have to help families take better care of themselves. We got to provide information and tools and support for them to do it. And then, yes, when people get sick, when we get sick, we want the best possible care that we could get. But we can't sustain
Where does
the
that
current model.
innovation take place? Who's motivated to it? Is that if you're a healthcare company, I mean, listen, here's a Lifespan. I think they're overjoyed this year. They made like $2 million on a $2 billion company. I mean,
Right.
that's.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the few industries, most industries, we're always talking about technology, and
Right.
most technology advances have produced lower cost access and made these services available to a broader part of our population.
Right.
Healthcare's got to be the only system in the world where we add technology
Right.
and the costs keep getting higher and higher and higher. And so now we're in a position where we're not competitive.
Right.
We're not competitive nationally versus other countries because we've allowed the cost to escalate without figuring out what are the models to deliver better, high quality outcomes, right, at the same or less cost.
So is
right?
part of it though that it's too big to fail, right? Healthcare is such a mammoth part of our employment structure. It's a mammoth part of our economies. There's 70,000 Rhode Islanders who are either directly or indirectly related to the healthcare
It's a big
industry.
part of our economy.
Yeah, of our top 5
That's
largest employers, 3 of them are healthcare companies,
Right.
CVS, Lifespan, and Care New England. Are we just going to have to realize some very tough medicine to be able to, excuse the pun,
No pun.
to be able
No
to
pun intended.
transform?
Well,
and
we-
who's motivated? I mean, if I'm a nonprofit and I'm the head of Lifespan and I'm making $2 million a year all day long,
Right.
am I really that excited about
About innovating.
reinvent?
Yeah.
About
Well, you're
reinventing?
interested in innovating in those things that make you stronger and improve your competitive position. When you look at it through the lens of the economy, in terms of the number of jobs,
Yeah.
right, you reach one conclusion. I think we've got to first and foremost look at a healthcare system that's about delivering to our citizens, right? Access to the tools and information they need to take better care of themselves, to be able to create better healthcare outcomes for the same or less money. Let's use technology to drive down the cost of healthcare, not continually drive up the cost of healthcare.
But if I'm CVS, listen, I'm
Yeah.
motivated. I've got shareholders. I'm the CEO. I'm the board of directors. If I don't start making some innovation that drives to a better bottom line, shareholder revolt. Look what's going on over at GE.
Right.
The
But
flip
here's
side.
here's
but
where
the
it's gonna
flip
come
side
from.
here, if I'm Care New England, okay, I've only got 43 days of cash on hand. Nothing seems to happen if I have 42 days, 41 days, or 40.
But here's what's going to really drive the change. I think now let's talk about it through the lens of us, the consumers.
Sure.
Right. It used to be that we all had insurance and it covered everything, and the costs of healthcare were transparent to us.
Totally.
Right. And now, little by little, now it's not so little. The amount that I'm being asked to pay as a consumer, regardless of where my insurance comes from,
Sure.
is going up. Where more of the costs of healthcare are being pushed out to the end consumer, and so all of a sudden, I care when my doctor, right, the specialist, the hospital, the pharmacy, right, starts to say,
But what's my choice right now? My choice right now is I can go to Care New England's hospital, or I can go to Lifespan's hospital, or I can go to Prospect's hospital. Nobody's shaking it up too much within some degree. Prospect's a for-profit, so they might be doing a little more innovation. But when's the tipping point
now you're
that transforms?
Now you're getting to what my normal message, right? Which is
This is it.
If you ask
This
me,
is it.
If you ask me, is Rhode Island innovating in healthcare? Is it actually exploring and testing the new models that will change this equation?
Right.
That will actually figure out what the needs are of the population and create models to be able to do it, including payment models.
Right.
We should be the place in the country where that's happening. right? We should be setting the trends for what's going to happen in healthcare to get better access, for less money
Right.
everywhere else in the country. Instead, we're playing the game like everyone else does, and we're too small, right, because of the market. So now we've waited too long to be the innovator. And what we end up with is worrying about partners coming in right here into Rhode
Right.
Island to save us from a system that can't sustain itself here locally.
Now, President Brown, Christina Paxson says, whoa, do not let partners in. It
Yeah.
will be the end of all our existing good things. It'll be the end of our med school, it'll be the end of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
having enough resources to be able to deliver. Everybody's going to be on a train to go up and get a surgery in Boston, and we're going to lose a huge
Right.
number of jobs, which is only going to make us poorer and less competitive.
But where in that argument?
Yeah.
I understand that argument.
Right.
I think we waited way too long, to be the innovator, to have a strength
Sure.
of a system that could expand out of the state as opposed to having incursions of folks trying to come in the state, right? But where's the part of that argument that's about giving me access to better models, lower cost healthcare, better outcomes? Instead, what she's talking about is how do we strengthen the med school, right? How do we create placements for more of our folks in the hospital so we can graduate more folks? How do we bring in more research dollars to create more technology?
Right.
How do we train more specialists? These are all the things that are driving costs up in our healthcare system. Where is the innovation in the stuff that's going to drive costs down or keep it flat and allow us to take better care of ourselves and to create better outcomes?
All right,
I don't hear that argument.
Let me go to the
right?
next argument.
Yeah, okay.
Bob Whitcomb, who is a proponent of for-profit hospitals, say, listen, let Brown's Partners prospect. They're motivated for innovation. They've
Yep.
got investors. They've got to make changes. They've got to really change the system. They've been successful here in the two hospitals that they're at, Roger Williams and Fatima. That's the kind of partnership you want. You want the medical school with the for-profit and see how that runs.
Well,
Because that's a more likely
These are two
scenario.
different, I think this notion, you hear the words academic integrated system,
Yep.
right, is code for strengthen the med school, enable us to train and place more specialists,
Mhm.
which I understand, but that doesn't address the issue. The issue of for-profit versus nonprofit, to me, I think that's a false choice. I don't really care what your corporate tax structure is. What I care about is your business model and whether you're delivering value to the folks who live here in Rhode Island, right? And I can get there with either a for-profit or a nonprofit.
We've heard
You
it
look
here,
at the
socialist
Right.
Saul Kaplan
No,
argument.
look at the nonprofits in our own state, right? You talked about some of them, the healthcare nonprofits, right? The CEOs of these nonprofits make more than almost
Right.
all the companies.
Right.
This
They
isn't-
do make more than
It's
the
not
company.
about whether they pay taxes on the dollars or they don't. It's about what value they deliver to us as Rhode Islanders.
Okay,
right?
so let's go to the next one. I'm firing all the
All
arguments.
the arguments that way, go
You
for
know,
it.
one of the arguments that we pointed out is, listen, when there's consolidation, big-time regional consolidation, and we can look over at that building right there, Rhode Island's generally not the winner. When we give up control of one of our big, there's one over there,
know.
and there's Providence Gas
That's
over
right.
there, that's now a hotel and
Right.
and a few restaurants. We lose a lot of important
Right.
jobs, we lose a
Sure.
lot of wealth, we lose a lot of involvement in the community and philanthropy and all those good things that go along with it. So if we surrender to partners, chances of innovation might be spectacular for Boston. Partners is the largest private
Yep.
employer in the state
Well,
of in the Commonwealth, over 70,000
Well,
employees.
two things. First of all, I'm not sure that argument is the central argument. I actually believe that if partners were to come in here, it's in their best interests, right, to make sure that they play the local game, build new relationships. So I don't think that argument wins the day unless.
I'm looking at
unless-
Superman
and-
building.
Unless and until, I agree with the part of your point that's about, should we have been innovating and becoming nationally good and exporting what we do outside of our borders? Should our large healthcare institutions have innovated so that people wanted to replicate replicate our model, and so that we were moving up towards Boston instead of having it come the other way.
Listen, I'm not arguing for
Absolutely.
parochialism,
Right.
but the reality is when a Rhode Island institution that has significant resources, assets,
I know, it's
jobs,
sad.
etc., we haven't won on any of those.
No, of course
those
not.
deals.
Why? Because we didn't innovate fast enough when our banks didn't become the national
Fleet-
players.
Fleet was.
Right, for a while, but what happens is if the
It's always
innovation
somebody
happens
bigger.
somewhere else, right, then the center of gravity is going to move somewhere else. You win when you're the innovator and you figure out better models and better ways to deliver value to customers.
So let's
if
go-
we had
so-
did that in healthcare, we would not be in the position of weakness today, where one of our large systems, is really suffering, had to jettison.
So if Partners,
Pawtucket to
if
get
Partners
the-
grabs Care New England, can I make the argument that it's only a matter of time before Yale New Haven takes over Lifespan and we're annexed to our neighboring healthcare mega giants?
My message to the folks here is this is where we don't use our size as an advantage.
Right.
Right? If we play the game like everyone else does,
Yep.
we don't have the critical mass.
Right.
They have more customers there. There are more dollars in Boston than there are here. Right? If we don't use our size and say, yeah, we're smaller, but we're going to innovate and be the leaders in the country for the way healthcare gets delivered. Everyone talks today, I'll give you an example. Everybody talks today about personalized medicine. All
Yep.
these new technologies that allow us to take individual, kind of information about you, your situation, and to tailor the approach, not this one size fits all, one pill that everybody takes,
Right.
One surgical procedure. You see this in cancer treatments today. Why don't we focus on not that building the technologies necessary, because we might create some of them, but they might get created in Boston or Silicon Valley. Why don't we become the experts in what does the delivery model look like, leveraging our size?
Kind of like Rajiv Kumar did
Exactly.
with
Oh, you see,
Virgin Pulse.
I'm a broken record on this, right? Our strategic advantage is we should be able to mobilize new models on behalf of the customers, the Rhode Island citizens, the people who live here. We should be demonstrating what population health really means here. And if we do that here,
Yeah.
and we create the solutions, the tools, the processes to do that, guess what? Everyone else around the country is going to be looking at Rhode Island, and all the companies that form to provide those solutions are going to be able to export their services. If we play the healthcare game the way everyone else does, we're too small, and we won't win. Just like
Is it too late?
What? It is late in the game, because if you wanted to avoid the mess we were in today,
Yeah.
and the concern about partners,
Yeah.
being able to come in here, right? That should have been innovation that happened a long time ago, to have the strength to be able to play that game outside of the borders, of our state. You can try to lean against it, with regulations and treat the border as healthcare stops at the
Right.
border, right? But I don't think that's how it's going to work, and I don't think in the end that's going to win the game. I think we got to help the existing institutions to innovate from here going forward, because that's how they're going to be strong, not only serving our needs, but actually positioning themselves regionally and nationally. They're in a difficult spot when you look at this game regionally right now, right? And that's what everyone's concerned about, and that's what Christine Brown is trying to do to protect the medical school, right?
Absolutely.
And the research thing that drives their business model.
Absolutely.
Right? I want to know where the voice is for not just the people who work in the current healthcare system, although I understand that, believe me,
Right.
as an economic developer, I'm concerned about those jobs too. My first concern is for the health and well-being of Rhode Islanders and access to cost-effective, higher quality outcomes. And I want that innovation to come wherever it comes from, right? If it comes from Boston, so be it, right? Like, so be it. And it's not that far up the road. That's sacrilege to say, here in Rhode Island.
You haven't driven up
But
there recently.
Let's make prime what the real challenge is here. Our health and well-being, and then secondarily, it creates a lot of jobs, right? But if you try to tune it for the jobs,
Right.
and not the actual healthcare, residences, and not then
The
you're gonna
last
get in trouble.
question. We just got a minute left. Is it going to be somebody else? Is it going to be Amazon with J.P. Morgan
Yeah.
and Berkshire Hathaway? Is
Right.
it going to be CVS? Is it going to be some unexpected player that's going to sneak up on these mammoth, slow-moving, lack of
That's right. That's where
innovator
the disruption
who's going to come through and launch a product like Amazon Prime and deliver it to your house 2 days later.
Well-
That it used to take 2 weeks to get it.
If you're thinking about it as a traditional healthcare player and you're not thinking that way, you're going to be vulnerable to disruption, as we've talked about many times. That's absolutely true in healthcare. Let's start. How about with the players that are already here? We've talked about CVS Health many
Yeah,
times,
right.
They have the potential to disrupt healthcare, the way it gets delivered today, and to take on the service delivery for a lot of things that don't need to happen in the
Right.
higher cost settings, right? And they're here, and a lot of their jobs are here,
Right.
Why aren't we enabling them to innovate, and to disrupt? Why? Because the incumbents in our existing system don't like when they do that very much. But if you think about it through the Rhode Island lens, again, put the citizen and the consumer at the center of this conversation, right? Because I think that's the way you get to the right answer. But you're right. Other players, every time Jeff Bezos sneezes,
Yeah.
with some idea of what he's going to do in healthcare, right? All the stock prices of all the traditional healthcare companies gets tanked, right? Are we really watching that movie?
Is that you
playing
constantly putting pepper before his nose and selling everything on it,
Oh, it's
and
it's certainly-
shorting all the
It's
stocks
certainly
of all
helped
the...
interest in what we do at BIF. There's no question about that.
Listen, thanks so much. Another great conversation. I want to thank everybody for tuning in on Business Monday. Tomorrow, Ava Gaudette is back at the 3 o'clock hour on Arts and Entertainment, and Kate Nagel is back. She's been at, I think, every press conference in the state of Rhode Island today. The POSOX poll, the governor's red flag press conference on gun control. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank our friends at Navigant Credit Union for sponsoring the broadcast center, and also our friends at Deepwater Wind, who've been a great partner in bringing Business Monday to everybody. Thanks, and over and out.